What's up, everybody? Can LaNorris Sellers get South Carolina back on track this year, or is Shane Beamer doomed no matter what he does? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along on today's show. We're previewing the South Carolina Gamecocks as we continue our SEC Spring Preview Series. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And by the way, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more now. New customers join today and get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, let's jump right into it as we dive into the South Carolina Gamecocks. We welcome in our buddy Andrew Lyon, who covers the Gamecocks for us here on Locked On. Andrew, welcome in, man. What an important season this is for Shane Beamer and company, and feels like we just finished the football season, and yet here we are on the precipice of another spring with all the teams out on the field hitting the practice field.
Yeah, Chris, you're absolutely right about that. Spring practice for South Carolina is going to be beginning this next Tuesday morning, and I'll be in attendance for that first spring practice. And you're certainly right. This is an important season for Shane Beamer after having a good first couple of years in Columbia, sort of fell off the rails a little bit in year 3 in 2023, going 5-7, missing out on a bowl game for the first time in his tenure, and a lot of new faces, as I'm sure we'll talk about as we go throughout the show. But for Shane Beamer, recruiting has been going well, but obviously at the end of the day, the fans care about the on-field results. And last season, it just sort of seemed like that some hidden issues kind of came to the forefront for South Carolina, especially when you look at the defensive side of the ball. The Gamecocks have done a great job of forcing turnovers in the first 2 seasons. Last year, not so much, and maybe sort of a bit of stubbornness in terms of running the same defensive scheme. It sort of caught up with them. They switched things up this past November, ran more of a 3-3-5 defensive scheme, and that seemed to work out well for them. And obviously, sort of the biggest storyline, Chris, is, offensively, they're switching quarterbacks. Spencer Rattler now moving on to the NFL. You lose Xavier Legette, and you got LaNorris Sellers coming in as the new starter and a lot of new faces around him. And they need things to kind of click pretty quickly because I'm sure we'll talk about it's a brutal slate for the Gamecocks this fall.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. A new day. I mean, look, they had Spencer Rattler in the last couple seasons, and it was nice. I mean, he was a really good quarterback, albeit behind a pretty rough offensive line. That I thought, I said all last offseason, I said this offensive line has got to get better, and they kind of didn't. And the run game really struggled. They tried to find a piece there. But let's talk about Sellers, because I remember when he committed. I want to say the 24/7 Sports Composite only had him as a 3-star. And I just didn't think like this is going to be, the next big thing at quarterback for them. What has been the buzz, I guess, over the last few months about LaNorris Sellers and why everyone is so believing in him being the guy?
Yeah, Chris, I think it's the fact that LaNorris, in terms of his potential, he possesses a rare blend of traits that we just don't see very often. Basically, if you want to build a quarterback in a factory and you're kind of playing Madden and you want to give him all sort of like the cool gadgets, like a cannon of an arm and be able to run like a 4.5 40-yard dash, that is LaNorris Sellers for South Carolina. He stands at about 6'3", 6'4", weighs about 240 pounds, and can shake defenders loose in the open field, can really be a factor in the run game. But he also, again, he could throw the ball 60, 65 plus yards downfield as well. And Gamecock fans got glimpses of that, in some garbage time against Furman and Vanderbilt. And obviously, for those watching on YouTube, you see the photo. He also played a bit of a role in that Kentucky game this past season. So there's been a lot of buzz about LaNorris Sellers ever since the day he committed to South Carolina. He won South Florence High School's first ever state championship up in the upstate for South Carolina a couple years back. And a lot of people think that he has the ability to, if things come together for him, he could be the best quarterback that this school's ever had. Not from strictly a talent standpoint, because obviously I think right now Spencer Rattler, he owns that above and beyond every other quarterback. But in terms of accomplishments, if things can be shored up on offense, the defense gets right, special teams continues to be a factor for Shane Beamer and this staff in Columbia, then people think LaNorris Sellers, he could lead South Carolina back to sort of the glory years, kind of like they had in the early part of the previous decade.
So we know he has a little bit of running ability. I find it very interesting that they, in the portal, they bring in Robbie Ashford from Auburn, who we know kind of became almost like the red zone Robbie last year at Auburn, where, the thought was, okay, we get to the goal line and we have a short yardage, down in distance. We can put Robbie Ashford in there. How do you think that's going to work? Like, is Robbie Ashford going to come in and just compete for this job? And if he loses to LaNorris, he'll just be the backup? Or do you think they will plan to have some packages for him like Hugh Freeze had?
Yeah, Chris, I would venture to say that right now, Sellers would probably be the starter if I had to stake my name on it. But I think that Ashford is certainly going to get some plays in this offense this coming fall. I think the main reason why that they got Robbie Ashford is because I think that Dal Loggins, the offensive coordinator for South Carolina, he's going to want to run more of an RPO-based offense this season, basically run pass options. Robbie Ashford, I think, is the kind of quarterback that can thrive in that kind of system. Not going to be expected to throw the ball 40, 50-plus yards down the field. More so work horizontally, both using his legs and also in the passing game as well. And obviously, you might ask Zach Blackerby over at Locked On Auburn. He might have not been the most efficient passer while he was down there on the Plains, but I think that with the experience that he offers, obviously SEC starting experience, that's invaluable in this league. And so I think it was a good pickup for Shane Beamer and this staff. And again, even if he's not the starter, he's going to bring something to that quarterback room, and he's going to help out, I think, LaNorris Sellers in a few different ways in 2024.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how they use him. And, again, if Sellers struggles at all, do they turn to Ashford at some point? We'll see. Talk about pass catching, because they lose two big dogs in Xavier Legette, who's going on to the pros, and then Antoine Juice Wells, one of the big storylines, transferring to Ole Miss this offseason. So who are some guys that you think are going to be ready to step up? I know they bring in some transfers, and of course, you got big old 5-star Nick Harbor, who came in last year, and they kind of tried to get him involved a little bit, but not a whole lot. So what's kind of expectation there at pass catchers?
Chris, the best way I can put it is wide receiver is going to be a complete mystery this season. But I'll start off with Nick Harbor. Harbor, obviously, he is a very unique circumstance because he played, edge rusher and a bit of wide receiver in high school, if you want to say he played wide out, but he was more so used in red zone situations for his high school team up in Washington, D.C. And now with South Carolina, he is converted full-time to wide receiver. And last year he showed flashes, but obviously still a lot of refining that needs to be done there. But with his speed, his track level speed, he's going to have a role with this wide receiver core this upcoming season. Will it be as a starter? I think that kind of remains to be seen. But the thing that sticks out to me, Chris, is when you look at a couple of the newcomers, Amari Huggins-Bruce, a transfer from Louisville, and also a Gage Larvadain, a transfer from Miami of Ohio. Those are two guys right there that are probably going to have big roles with this receiving core, two experienced guys, Larvadain in particular. Kind of like a Juice Wells in the sense that he has succeeded at lower levels of football and continued to just kind of climb the ladder, in terms of going from the group of 5 now to the power 5 level, or I guess power 2 now in the SEC. But the thing is, both of those guys, they're about 5'10", 5'11", 175. There's not a Xavier Legette on this roster right now. So unless Nick Harbor becomes that in one off season, which I highly doubt, he's been running track for the past few months. This wide receiver core, it's going to be interesting to see how Dal Loggins uses those guys and tries to put them in the best situation to help out LaNorris Sellers, a first-time starter in the SEC later this season.
Yeah, one other guy that makes Jared Brown come over from Coastal Carolina, what role does he fill? And then, oh, by the way, Luke Doty, I think, has made the full transition. We're not even considering him at quarterback anymore, right? He's just straight, pass-catching weapon.
He's basically Swiss Army knife. Luke Doty's consummate teammate. He might not be the best wide receiver necessarily, but, he's going to do whatever he needs to do to help this team out. And obviously, it's great to have a guy like that in the locker room at all times.
Okay, real quick on the offensive line. Has it improved at all from last year?
Offensive line, I would say, is more talented. You bring in a couple of really good freshmen, Cam Pringle from Woodland, South Carolina. The big name is obviously Josiah Thompson, who was a 5-star over at Dillon High School. Obviously, Chris, you know this. Offensive lineman as true freshman, it's very tough to crack, even the 2 deep, much less the starting lineup. But I think this group is going to be better. You got Rashawn Lee coming back. He's sort of going to be the leader of that group. He kind of shared that role with Nick Gargiulo this past fall. Now it's going to kind of just really fall on his shoulders to make sure that everybody is going in the right direction. But I think that with the skill players, they're still going to have to pick up the slack for the offensive line. But I mean, it can't be much worse than it was in 2023.
Let's in that and closing on the offense, let's talk run game. You go out, running back has not been a strength for South Carolina these last couple seasons. The one productive back from a couple of years ago, Marshawn Lloyd, he ran off to USC last year. So Rocket Sanders going into Arkansas, getting a proven SEC running back in Rocket, bringing him in. They go get Oscar Attaway from North Texas, and then Jawan Howell from right there in state. I think South Carolina upstate, I want to say. But talk about Rocket. I mean, again, I look at it and say he struggled to run last year because of health, but also Arkansas's offensive line wasn't all that great. Unless South Carolina's offensive line dramatically improves, I don't know how Rocket Sanders is going to be, 1,000-yard rusher in the SEC, but it could happen. What's the expectations here for Rocket?
Yeah, Chris, I think that for Rocket, he's definitely going to be the bell cow of this offense. And the thing that's very interesting is a lot of people do kind of view this as a lateral move. We just talked about South Carolina's O-line. It's still a question mark of whether or not they're going to be improved from last season. And then when you look at LaNorris Sellers and the type of quarterback that he is, he's very similar to a KJ Jefferson over at Arkansas, who is now at UCF with Gus Malzahn, an old friend in the SEC. But I think that for Rocket Sanders, the thing about him is he's got that connection with Dow Loggins. Dow Loggins was on that Arkansas coaching staff in 2021 and 2022. And so Dow Loggins got some experience under Kendall Briles in that offense. And that could mean that South Carolina tries to sort of replicate what Briles did at Arkansas during those couple of seasons, because they got the personnel, at least at quarterback and at running back, to do it. But obviously, again, it's all going to depend on that offensive line. But Rocket Sanders was a good pickup, obviously the best one this offseason for South Carolina. He's going to help them out in the run game and also help them out in the pass game as well, because he played some wide receiver in high school. So certainly going to be sort of a do-it-all guy for the Gamecocks in that backfield this season.
All right, coming up next, we'll switch gears and we will talk a little bit on the defensive side of the ball in our South Carolina spring preview here on Locked On SEC. Well, first, I want to remind you guys this episode is presented to you by our friends over at Robinhood. We've been telling you guys about our friends over at Robinhood. And look, did you know that if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. No cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info, claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. That's robinhood.com/boost. This episode also presented to you by our friends over at Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. So whether it's opening weekend for baseball, the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to make sure you have Fire TV. They recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro sports leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date in all the latest in the world of sports. We're talking NBA, MLB, college, all of it, not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked them out, go learn more. Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. And we continue on our preview here of the South Carolina Gamecocks with our buddy Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks. And Andrew, as we look at the defensive side of the ball for the Gamecocks, it was a little up and down last year. They gave up a lot of points and wound up in a couple shootouts here and there. But talk a little bit about this defense and how much improved can they be?
Yeah, Chris, we talked earlier about how this is a pivotal season for Shane Beamer. I would say it's make or break for defensive coordinator Clayton White. Clayton White, this is now going to be his fourth season here in Columbia. First season, did pretty well. It was a transition year, got those guys to sort of buy into what he wanted to do. And then second season, saw a little bit of regression. Then last year, the bottom sort of fell out. It led to a scheme change for the Gamecocks in November, which kind of helped to spur that late season winning streak against, I want to say it was Jacksonville State, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, obviously not world beaters compared to, usual SEC teams, but still good nonetheless. But for the Gamecocks, again, a lot of new faces with this group. You have some continuity on the back end. Nick Emmanwori is the first guy that we start with, obviously a future NFL player back there. Also got DQ Smith and a freshman All-American in Jalon Kilgore. If there's one position group that South Carolina has just stockpiled talent at the last couple of years, it's been the safety position. But unfortunately, in this league especially, you got to have edge rushers, you got to have corners that are going to play really well. And South Carolina just did not have that last year. There was very little pass rush juice from that unit. They got a couple good interior D linemen. Tonka Hemingway is one, TJ Sanders being another. They lose Marcel Style to the NFL. So now, once again, new cornerback's going to be coming in. O'Donnell Fortune is going to be the veteran at that spot. But they got some young freshmen. They're probably going to step up there as well. The biggest name, obviously, in terms of newcomers is going to be Dylan Stewart, 5-star out of the Washington, D.C. area, another edge rusher. The question I'm going to have, Gordy, is how are they going to use him? If they stick with that 4-2-5, obviously he'll kind of be your stand-up edge rusher. But if they go to a 3-3-5, then where does he go? Does he go outside linebacker? Are you going to really put Dylan Stewart on the inside half of an offensive tackle with his hand in the dirt? Probably wouldn't be the best way to utilize him there. So that's going to be sort of the biggest question is what kind of system are you going to run and how are you going to slot some of your top-tier talent like a Dylan Stewart in that defensive scheme?
Yeah, and a couple guys, transfers coming in. They bring in Monkel Goodwine, defensive line depth, and then Gilbert Edmond back in the fold as well. And you were talking DBs. You said Jalon Kilgore. I see Gerald Kilgore's also coming in, the brother.
Yep. Now you got a brother tandem back there. He comes from Tennessee Tech and played pretty well. He's a quarterback by trade, but converted to safety. So kind of makes sense because of the traits that you need for that position. So it'll be interesting to see what he does in terms of bringing depth to that spot.
Yeah, it's just going to be a big year for these guys and to be able to show what they could do. And a guy named Debo Williams coming in at linebacker as well from Delaware. Going to be an interesting year because I think back to last year, man, they played so well that first half against Georgia and kept them in the game and did everything they could. But then it was like a stretch of, you give up 30 to Mississippi State, 41 to Tennessee, 41 in that stupid shootout with Florida. You give up 34 to Mizzou. It was just, it was a bad stretch of games for that defense. So no doubt the South Carolina defense is going to need to be a lot better. Who excites you most on that defensive side of the ball?
The player that excites me the most, probably Dylan Stewart, just to stick with the theme here, because South Carolina, again, they have not really had much pass rush since Shane Beamer got here. The last guy they really had that could cause a lot of havoc up front was Kingsley Enagbare. He now plays for the Green Bay Packers and, had a bit of an impact in the playoffs when they defeated the Dallas Cowboys. So they have not really had a guy of that caliber since J.J. Enagbare was here, Gordy. So I think that Dylan Stewart, there's a lot of talk about he might need to refine his technique a little bit in terms of the run game, but the potential is there. I mean, if you go back and watch the Under Armour All-America game, he was just all over the place. And there were a couple times where he made 5-star offensive tackle commit for Colorado, I believe, Jordan Seaton, just look absolutely silly. So, you go talk to Brian, our Locked On Recruiting Insider. Dylan Stewart, he's a game changer for this defensive unit. He could help sort of turn the tide on that side of the ball when 2024 rolls around.
Any chance of shades of Jadeveon Clowney at all, or different style of player?
Clowney was special. Clowney was just special in so many different ways. I'm not going to go that far yet. Does he have the potential to be the best pass rusher the team has had since Clowney? Now that I could get on board with that.
Yeah, and never forget, Jordan Birch was supposed to be the next big thing, and it just, for whatever reason, didn't really pan out. He went off to Oregon, and never really worked out with him. But you're right; it's South Carolina's got to find that big time edge rusher, and it very well could be in the true freshman come in. All right, we're gonna switch gears when we return. We'll talk a little bit on the schedule because it is an absolutely brutal one for Shane Beamer, and we'll talk floor and ceiling, and what does Shane Beamer have to do to absolutely bare minimum keep his job. We'll talk about that next with Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks. But first, I want to remind you guys, this episode is presented to you by our friends over at Nissan. Look, this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we are picking one team that stands out, a team that has pushed it further than the rest, just like all of the new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. And the Tennessee Vols, they can only be described as a pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the SEC, wrapping up that regular season SEC championship. And Player of the Year candidate Dalton Connect has carried the Vols all season long and made them a team to watch throughout March. Of course, he was just named the SEC Player of the Year. So congrats to the Vols. And again, very much like the Nissan Pathfinder. So take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can shop all those vehicles at nissanusa.com. That's nissanusa.com. Go check out everything that Nissan has to offer and all those great quality SUVs that you can ride in style, but still feel like you're hitting the road for a big time adventure. nissanusa.com. All right, as we jump back into it with Andrew Lyon of Locked On Gamecocks. And Andrew, as we look at this the South Carolina schedule, it is a brutal one, as it typically is. It's funny, there's a theme when we're previewing Arkansas and South Carolina. They just always seem to get the short end of the stick with the schedules. But man, I look at, right out of the gate, you get North Carolina, which we know was a tough one last year to open. I'm sorry, that was last season. But looking at last season, right out of the gates, it was a rough go. This year, you get a little bit of a softer palette week one with Old Dominion, but then boom, it's week two. You're on the road in Kentucky already playing a conference game. And then week three, you're at home playing LSU. So no rest for the weary here for the Gamecocks. You get the tune-up game against Old Dominion, and then it's diving headfirst into this thing.
Yeah, Chris, you're absolutely right. I believe that game against Kentucky is the first SEC game of the season. And obviously, South Carolina, Kentucky, there's no love lost there. I would actually say it's kind of become a little bit of a rivalry, maybe one of the more underrated games on the SEC slate in the past couple years. And, the thing is with Kentucky, they're also breaking in a new quarterback, Brock Vandergriff, the transfer out of Georgia. And they've lost to South Carolina each of the past 2 years. There's kind of question marks about Mark Stoops. Has he hit his ceiling up there in Lexington? So they're going to want that game badly. And that might be a game that South Carolina's got to take if they want to make it to a bowl game. But, obviously you get Old Dominion week one, week three at LSU, against LSU at home. That might be a game where, you're thankful that this game is early because LSU, still very talented team under Brian Kelly, but they do replace a lot of offensive pieces. I mean, Jaden Daniels goes on to the NFL along with the Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas. I know Logan Diggs also now plays for Ole Miss, amongst all the other SEC transfers in this conference. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a mixture of, some softballs early on and then a couple tough ones in the middle. So I would say if you're South Carolina, if you can go 3-1 in that stretch, maybe you get Kentucky or you steal one against LSU, that's probably your best outlook here in the first part of the schedule.
Yeah, because week four, you get Akron and you should win that one. But yeah, I would say if you're a Gamecock fan, 3-1, if you say 3-1, you'll absolutely take that. And like you said, either a road win at Kentucky or a home win against LSU. Worst case, you're sitting there 2-2. And then this October stretch you get into of home against Ole Miss, who figures to be one of the best teams in the conference, at Alabama. Yes, Nick Saban's gone, but Kalen DeBoer, still a talented roster. At Oklahoma, welcome to the SEC, Oklahoma. And hey, South Carolina, you wanted better teams added to the conference. You got it. And then home against A&M. I think that is probably one of the toughest 4-game stretches of anybody in the conference.
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to be honest with you. It's hard to see any wins coming out of there. I guess if I had to pick one game that, South Carolina might be able to get, I'll go with Ole Miss just because it's going to still kind of be early. And also, the Gamecocks do get a bye week before that game against Ole Miss. And they're going to meet up with their old friend, Juice Wells, who's, of course, now playing for Lane Kiffin in that offense. But yeah, if Ole Miss, if they could just mesh together from a team chemistry standpoint, Ole Miss is going to make a Florida State-like run this year. I mean, I'm not going to say they go undefeated in the regular season because obviously SEC is way tougher than anything the ACC has to offer. But yeah, that's just, it's one of the toughest stretches out of any team. The only other team I can think of that's got a tougher stretch is Florida. I will not say that this is tougher than what they've got in November on that end. Apologies, Brandon Olson. But yeah, I don't see a win out of there. So, maybe you get Ole Miss. Otherwise, I see you going over in the month of October if you're South Carolina.
I think if they don't get Ole Miss, maybe they can get A&M. Again, transition, Mike Elko, coming in, and we'll see what Connor Wegman looks like with Colin Klein calling plays there. But let's say, for argument's sake, they get one of those. So let's say they go 1-3. So we had ultimate optimism starting 3-1 and then 1-3. So that puts them at 4-4. So you're still in good shape. The back 4 games, you go to Vandy, very winnable. Home for Mizzou, which we know Mizzou was one of the best teams in the East last year. Brady Cook is back. Luther Burden's back. They do lose Cody Schrader. Curry Moore's back calling plays, but they do lose Blake Baker on defense. So, maybe that's one you could steal if Mizzou takes a little bit of a step back. Then you get Wofford, and then, of course, it's the road trip at Clemson, which, you beat Clemson 2 years ago, and it's kind of like they're not, Dabo's been fine there, but it's like they're not Clemson of 5, 6, 7 years ago. So maybe winnable if LaNorris Sellers is playing great and the defense is doing well and the offensive line's protecting. So, let's say 2-2 there. I think 6-6 is doable, but to me, that's kind of like if I'm predicting South Carolina's schedule, that's almost an upside saying 6-6 based on how tough the schedule is.
Yeah, Chris, I 100% agree with you. Looking at the schedule, I would say the floor is probably 4-8. We could say that Vanderbilt, you could probably say that's going to be a win. And then obviously Akron, Wofford, the non-con outside of Clemson, that's 4 wins right there. And if you're South Carolina, you got to find 2 more. I think that you can definitely get Kentucky. Ole Miss, you might be able to get. You might be able to get Texas A&M. You brought up Missouri. I'll probably say I give the edge to Missouri still there. And then Clemson, I'm interested to see what Clemson does this year. Lost a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. And sure, they beat South Carolina last year, but it wasn't like they just blew them out of the water and the Gamecocks had no chance late. So that's going to be an intriguing one as well. So again, kind of like we mentioned with the team earlier, Chris, it's a mystery what South Carolina's going to do this year, how they're going to perform on either side of the ball. It could either, all come together and South Carolina's one of the biggest surprise teams in the SEC, or it could just completely go off the rails. And then we've got some big questions we're asking here in Columbia after the season's over.
Yeah, you said 4-8 is the floor. I think Shane Beamer is gone if he goes 4-8, even 5-7, which is what he did a year ago. I think if you go 2 straight years missing a bowl game, I think, it's weird. We've just put this thing in our heads where it's like 6-6 and going to a bowl game saves your job in most scenarios, unless you're in Alabama or something like that. But I think the goal should be 6-6. I feel like anything less than 6-6, they have to make a tough decision. And I think they move on. Is it the vibe you get?
Yeah, Chris, I would say that if it's 4-8 or less, then yeah, Shane Beamer, his job's in jeopardy. I mean, I definitely would agree with you there. He goes 5-7. He might be able to say, okay, well, we had a tough schedule in the SEC, new schedule, new starting quarterback in LaNorris Sellers. Give me one more shot. If he goes 6-6 or better, then yeah, I think that the seat cools a little bit for Beamer. But again, no question, this is an important year for Shane, and he's going to have to find a way to bounce back, even if it means you take a couple games that most people don't expect you to win.
Yeah, and I guess what does it look like, right? Like if they're 4-7 and LaNorris Sellers starting to play better down the stretch and they go beat Clemson, they finish 5-7. Yeah, I think he's fine. So it's always, what does it look like? Did you lose a couple games by a field goal here and there? But any performances like last year, getting blown out in some of those big games, it could get ugly very fast. Andrew, before we let you go, give me a quick thought. I know South Carolina just had their pro day this week, one of the first SEC schools to have their pro day. Any big takeaways from obviously Xavier Legette and All the different guys there. Spencer Rattler. What were your takeaways from the pro day?
Main takeaway was Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette. They're absolute dudes, and whoever picks them up in the NFL draft, I think that they're going to get two potential Pro Bowl caliber players. I think that Spencer Rattler, I think still too many people outside of South Carolina, Chris, look at him as the Rattler from Oklahoma. Spencer Rattler's a different quarterback now. He's a different quarterback. He is, I think, more pro-ready than most give him credit for, and he's, more importantly, matured a lot as a leader. So I think that whoever picks him up in the NFL draft, they're going to get a really good quarterback there that can start for them immediately. Xavier Legette, downfield threat. I mean, you want another A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf, Ole Miss fans, then I think Xavier Legette's going to be the next kind of wideout of that archetype in the NFL from the SEC. So a guy that can be a real threat for you in the red zone, but also just deep down the field on shot plays as well.
It was funny. I saw him kind of going viral this week. People didn't know what he sounds like and his accent, and kind of sounds like an old man, as people said. So kind of funny that went viral. But I'm with you on Rattler. I mean, we've had him on the show a couple of times in the last 2 years, and so much more humbled and mature. Like going to South Carolina humbled him. Getting his ass beat last year in the field, like getting beat up. Like I think he handled it maturely, and I think, probably a backup in the NFL. Third string maybe in his rookie year, but like I do think he has a future there. And look at all these guys these backup quarterbacks that have made a living out of being backups around the NFL. I think Spencer Rattler can absolutely be that. So we'll see, and we'll wish him the best of luck. Andrew, always good to catch up with you, man. Best of luck to the Gamecocks, and we'll check back in with you post-spring and see what Shane Beamer Company do in the transfer portal, if they add any other pieces, and we'll get your biggest takeaways post-spring coming up in a couple of weeks. But thanks for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Chris, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Come on back on Monday on the show. We'll continue our spring series with a few more teams happening into next week. And hey, for your second listen, go check out Andrew talking all things South Carolina, or check out our Locked On Sports Today page on YouTube, streaming for you 24/7, covering all the top stories of the sports world each and every day. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody.